going to be your tour guide for the day. Now we're going to be taking a look at aviation history at its best, with a variety of airplanes ranging from commercial, civilian, military, and search and rescue aircraft. Now this is going to be a non-stop tour lasting about 45 minutes, and at the end of it, I'm going to drop you right off back here. Now a few friendly reminders just before we get started. Please everybody stay seated at all times. Don't want to see any meerkats in my window up here, okay? Yep, so butts and seats please, you'll be able to see. And also similar, just keep your arms, legs, belongings, people you brought with you on the tram, inside the tram.
You know what? I was going to hook the 360 camera and have it sticking out.
Please be courteous to your fellow passengers. That way everybody can hear for the entirety of the tour. And last but not least, I am more than happy to answer questions. I just ask that you hold them until the end of the tour.
I could.
A little hard for me to field them up here. Navy and Marine aircraft. Now, most of these are going to be carrier-based planes that perform the space combat jets, fighters, and bombers. But they also have to incorporate strengthened structures to help withstand the forces of being catapulted off of carrier decks and yanked to a stop when landing. Now, taking off and landing on a carrier is one of the most difficult jobs that an aviator can have, because your runway is only 500 feet long. There's only 4 cables stretched across it to catch you, and it's moving away from you by like about 35 miles an hour. Oh, and it can move up and down by up to 30 feet. Easy, right? No, not easy. That is why a lot of studies have actually shown that landing on an aircraft carrier is more stressful for some pilots than being shot at in combat. So, highly skilled aviators here. And our first example on our left-hand side is our McDonnell Douglas FA-18 Hornet in the Blue Angels colors of blue and yellow. Now, the Hornet is currently one of the fighters used by both the U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps. They've been in service since the early 1980s, and later versions are expected to remain in use for the foreseeable future. This one here flew with the U.S. Navy's Blue Angels aerobatic team for several years before being retired in 2013.
Okay.
I want one.
On the left-hand side of the tram, our next up is going to be our EA-60 Prowler, the gray aircraft with the long tube coming out the nose. Now this is an electronic warfare aircraft designed to jam or destroy enemy radars. Now this one has a bit of a unique history because in the late 1990s, the Marines decided that they needed more Prowlers. And one of the ways they went about getting them? Refurbishing old aircraft and putting them back into service. Now for this aircraft, 3 Prowlers were removed from AMARC facility here in Tucson, taken apart, and then stitched together into this one Prowler. Got put back into service in 2004, and because of the way that it was built from the parts of several aircraft, it got the nickname of the Frankenprowler.
Frankenpower. Like Frankenstein. Look at these old puppies.
And now the 2-seat trainer version of Great Britain's first jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor, is on our right-hand side here. Now, Meteors were the only Allied jet to see combat during World War II. And the 2-seat trainer, like this one, was introduced after World War II, around 1948. And over 700 ended up being produced for Great Britain and 7 foreign militaries. Now, today there are still 2 Meteor trainers in use with the Martin Baker Company. They're currently using them to test out ejection seats. And now if you're looking at this aircraft and feel that the nose looks a little funny, that's a good observation because it is. When we originally acquired this aircraft, the nose was not there. So we had to get creative and attach the nose of a night fighter. So if anybody happens to know where the original one went, please tell us. We would love to know what happened to it because where it went, just nobody quite knows. And now, also on our right, we're going to see a lot of the museum's other trainers. Now, military trainers generally have 2 seats, one for an instructor and one for a student. Prospective pilots first learn the basics of flight, so how to take off, control a plane in the air, and land. That's typically done in a smaller, propeller-driven aircraft. But once they've mastered that, they're going to move up onto bigger, more sophisticated, usually jet-powered aircraft, to learn the basics of high-speed flight, as well as a little bit of aerial combat. But it isn't until they're actually in the aircraft they'll be flying themselves where they are going to learn how to employ their weapon systems, as well as more sophisticated combat techniques. And most trainers typically are designed with the purpose of being a trainer, but sometimes other aircraft have to be modified to fill that role.
That'd be fun.
Oh.
And now on the right hand side, we're going to see our Sepicat Jaguar, and yes, that is the pink plane. Now this is one guests are typically pretty curious about, because I mean you don't see a whole lot of pink aircraft out there now, do you? Now this was originally intended to be a 2-seat supersonic jet trainer and light attack aircraft. In the end though, it ended up being produced as a single-seat interceptor with nuclear capability. And they entered service with the French Air Force and British Royal Air Force in the early 70s. This one here flew with the British Royal Air Force in the First Gulf War. Now that unique color is specifically known as desert pink. So it's supposed to provide good camouflage in the desert sands of the Middle East. We did not just want to go full Pink Panther on our Jaguar. All for camouflage.
That thing looks amazing.
That's just awesome. Isn't it?
The power.
Yeah.
Now the yellow and black plane on our right-hand side is going to be our Fokker C-31 troopship. Now this is the militarized version of the F-27 Friendship, designed in the Netherlands. This here is one out of 2 that were delivered to the United States Army to be used by the U.S. Army Golden Knights Parachute Demonstration Team. And now the Golden Knights perform at air shows and competitions all around the world, as well as perform tandem jumps with heads of states and celebrities. This actually included our former president, George H.W. Bush, in 2004. So quite a fun job there.
No kidding.
And now speaking of heads of state, that brings us to our next collection we're going to take a look at on the right. That's going to be our VIP transports. Now these are typically aircraft used to transport high-ranking military officers as well as government officials. Normally, it's a commercial airliner that's been modified with some executive seating. And our first prime example here on our left-hand side is our triple-tailed Lockheed VC-121 Constellation. Now, this one here was used... Did I say left? Oh, to the right. Everybody to the right. There we go. All our VIP transports are on the right. There we go. Now, this one was used by General Dwight Eisenhower when he was commander of Allied forces in Europe after World War II. It's named Columbine after the state flower of Colorado, where his wife was from.
Oh.
Yeah. It's the same flower that's actually painted on the nose of the aircraft. And now, directly next to the Columbine on the right, we're going to have our green VH-34 Choctaw helicopter. And now this is an Army VIP transport helicopter that was converted from a cargo and troop transport helicopter. Now this one carried Presidents Kennedy, Eisenhower, and Johnson between 1960 and 1964. But beginning in 1964, all presidential helicopter operations were transferred over to the U.S. Marines from the Army. So this one had to go back to being a cargo and troop transport helicopter, just like the rest of the Choctaws served as until their retirement from military service in 1974. And now the next 2 aircraft we're going to touch on are going to actually both use the call sign of Air Force One, meaning they've both been used to carry United States presidents. Now the first one we're going to see here is the larger of the 2. This is the militarized version of the Boeing 707, Air Force called the VC-137. Now this one was introduced to the presidential aircraft fleet in 1959 and was the second of 5 VC-137s to serve the executive branch. during most of its service life, it was used to carry large groups of VIPs, but it did carry President Kennedy on at least one occasion. And now, in 1981, this plane was the one used to bring the 52 American hostages held in the embassy in Iran back to the United States after the release. On that special occasion, it got to use the call sign of Freedom One. And then in 1991, it got to use that wonderful call sign once more, when it was used to bring American prisoners of war back home after the end of the Gulf War in Iraq. And then, just before its retirement, it also served as Air Force Two, carrying Vice President Al Gore. So quite the service history on this one, a lot of call signs.
Should have crashed with Al Gore in it.
Be nice.
Now, our next Air Force One is the Douglas DC-118A Liftmaster on our right here. And this was based off the Douglas DC-6 airliner. It was actually the last propeller-driven aircraft to be assigned as the primary aircraft of the President of the United States. This one served both Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. And now, while both men did prefer to fly on the larger, faster, jet-powered VC-137 like we just took a look at, this aircraft was very important to the Air Force One fleet, because a lot of airports at the time were not big enough to accommodate that massive jet. So this greatly expanded where all our presidents could land by having a smaller aircraft. And right here you're going to see a very large building. That is the 390th Memorial Museum. Inside they have a fully restored World War II B-17 Flying Fortress, as well as artifacts from the 390th Bomb Group. Now they do operate independently of the Pima Aerospace Museum, but admission is free to all visitors. So, if that sounds interesting to you, feel free to pop on over at the end of our tour. It's not too far of a walk from the Aerospace Gallery. They love to see new faces. On the right-hand side, we have two of the later versions of the F-86 Sabre. This was the United States' first swept-wing fighter jet, which was put into service during the Korean War to compete with the Soviet-designed MiG-15s. Now the H version, slightly behind us here, is the one with the black and yellow tail markings. That featured a larger fuselage and updated weaponry. It's also the last version of the Sabre to be put into service that was not radar-equipped. Now the L version, on the other hand, a little bit more in front of us here, some with the blue and white tail markings. This was a radar-equipped interceptor version of the Sabre, and if you notice the different shapes of the nose between the two aircraft, you're going to notice that's how they are able to accommodate that radar equipment on some of the later versions of the Sabre.
Look at the missile.
And now the group of aircraft we're coming up on our left here is called the Harriers. And this is actually the world's most inclusive collection of the most significant versions of the vertical takeoff and landing jet fighter. Now the Hawker Aviation in the United Kingdom, and it was adopted by both the British military and U.S. Marine Corps in the 1970s. Now there are 4 rotating nozzles that live underneath the wings. That helps to direct the exhaust from the engine downward for vertical flight. And now the silver aircraft in the middle that we are pulling up next to here is one of the experimental Kestrel prototypes. Now the other aircraft all have served in the British Royal Navy, Air Force, or with the United States Marine Corps. Fun fact, you folks are actually my first tram tour since we've put our final one in our collection out. But now we're going to take a look at some of our United States Air Force supersonic jet fighters. Now, the introduction of jet engines at the end of World War II brought the quest for ever faster speeds to the forefront of fighter development in the 50s and the 60s. Now, the military was beginning to de-emphasize the maneuverability needed in the dogfight era and instead focus on long-range missiles for air-to-air combat.
So cool.
Yep, you hear that coming, it's too late.
All right, now two
Yeah.
excellent examples of that design philosophy are actually, we're going to start on our right. They're the light gray colored aircraft, and the F-102 Delta Dagger is the one in the red tail markings, and the F-106 Delta Dart has our yellow tail markings. Both of these were designed as high-speed interceptors, and their triangular or delta-shaped wings are very efficient at high speeds. But that does make them significantly less maneuverable than aircraft with other wing types. Their mission, though, was to fly out at supersonic speeds to intercept enemy bombers before they could reach the coast of the United States. But now, on the left side of the tram, we're going to have another supersonic jet fighter from the 60s, and that is our Phantom F-4. That one might be a little bit more familiar to you folks. That is the first green and brown camouflage aircraft on that side on our left here. And now, this was originally designed to be a high-speed interceptor for the U.S. Navy. But its design proved to be a lot more adaptable than the 102 or 106 that we just saw. So for that reason, the Air Force also adopted the Phantom and used it both for air-to-air combat as well as for bombing ground targets. Now, the Phantom was originally designed without a gun, and it relied solely on missiles for combat against other aircraft. However, combat in Vietnam and the Middle East quickly showed that the era of the dogfight had not actually ended. So a lot of these were actually retrofitted with additional guns to help them keep up with that. And in fact, the Phantom actually did have to battle against the Soviet Union's gun-armed and quicker fighters. So, American pilots had to learn how to overcome those Phantom's deficiencies with better training and superior tactics. That allowed it to become one of the most successful and widely used strike fighters ever. So your aircraft does not need to be perfect. Everyone's going to have their pros and cons. You just got to learn how to fly it. Now, as we round this corner, we do have one more stop. If we look to the right, we're going to see a silver aircraft with the red lightning bolt on it. That is one of the United States' first jet fighters to go into production. That is the P-80 Shooting Star. Now, all major powers on both sides of World War II were working to develop jet-powered combat aircraft during the war. Germany was the first to fly a jet-powered aircraft in 1939, but by 1944, Germany, Great Britain, and the United States had all designed their first combat jets. But while the British and Germans put theirs into service during World War II, the United States held off until the Korean War in the 50s when they were used for air support of ground troops, which is why the Gloucester Meteor that we mentioned earlier was the only Allied combat jet in World War II.
That's amazing, Ray.
That thing's gonna let me fly it.
Well, you're a pilot. You can fly it.
I take that for a ride. That's just cool looking.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, looks like a bug.
Now, coming up on our left-hand side, we're going to see a rather unusual looking aircraft. And this is going to be our Bud RB-1 Conestoga, which was built during World War II. Now, we can all admit it looks a little funky. It's okay. We can say it. Now, the reason for this, at the time, the U.S. government believed that there was going to be a shortage of aluminum available to build military aircraft. So, they sought out designs that were using non-strategic materials. Normally, that refers to wood. But Bud Company wanted to experiment with spot-welded stainless steel. And so, there was a lot of interest from the Army and the Navy, but that aluminum shortage never developed. So, only 17 Conestogas were actually built. Now, this one here was used by several freight companies before it was eventually abandoned in Douglas, Arizona's airport. don't worry, it got donated to the museum in its current condition, might I add, so kind of like the meteor, if you see those parts, please tell us. And we've given it a lot more friends, a little bit better of a social life here. It's no longer abandoned. Now, the next group of aircraft on our right-hand side is going to be our light civil aircraft from the 30s, 40s, and the 50s. And now, these are aircraft designed and built to provide personal transportation for individuals. Many of these airplanes were actually sold as kits that pilots would then build themselves in their own backyard. So you would never see me flying one of these because I don't trust my building skills that much. And now the military did also use these as small transport aircraft for pilots who had been assigned to non-flying duties to help them keep up their flight skills. Now there is one specific light civil aircraft I want to highlight for us all, and that is going to be on our right here. That is the Snow S2A crop duster. And aircraft such as these are vital to the agricultural industry. It's our yellow aircraft with the blue on it as well. And so these are used to spray fertilizers and pesticides on crops and farmlands. Now the flying involved in aerial application or crop dusting is technically challenging and occasionally hazardous. So the pilots who fly these have to be highly skilled and trained in all aspects of the process, not just flight skills. So that includes things like safe pesticide use as well as entomology. Jack of all trades, if you will. But now that we've seen some civil aircraft, we're going to turn our attention back to the left side of the tram and start to take a look at some of our more commercial airliners, especially from the 40s and the 50s. So our first one on the left here is the Vickers Viscount airliner with the turboprop engines. Now the Vickers Viscount is the world's first propeller turbine or turboprop airliner, and it was designed and built by Vickers Armstrong Limited of Great Britain. In total, there were 445 Viscounts made from 1948 to 1964, and they flew for over 60 years, with the last one retiring in just 2008. All things considered, not that long ago. And now ours here on display at the museum was actually the first turboprop airliner in North America. Flew from Toronto to New York City for Trans-Canada Airlines, holding between 40 and 63 passengers and 3 to 4 crew members.
We have that in our museum in Winnipeg.
That one? Or
no, the Air Canada one.
And now on our right hand side we see the aircraft with the gray body and the yellow wings. This is our Sikorsky S-43 Baby Clipper, an airliner from the 30s that was also used by the Navy and Marine. Now in the 30s, many airliners were developed as seaplanes because at the time, flight was still relatively new. We didn't have a lot of airports, runways, or just flight infrastructure in general. But lakes, rivers, and oceans made very useful substitutes. Now this one could hold 15 passengers and 3 crew members, and ours flew for Inter Island Airways in Hawaii in the 30s and 40s. It was then transferred to Alaska in the 50s. I know, weather change right there. And it didn't really like that apparently, because in Alaska it was badly damaged in an accident and then took a nice 30-year-long nap underwater in a lake. Don't worry, it got fished out by a member of the U.S. Marine Corps, restored and then later loaned to our museum, and we're doing a much better job of keeping her all dried out, if I do say so myself.
I guess that's where they restore the.
And now, after World War II, we began to see the next generation of airliners taking shape in the form of the Constellation, lovingly known as the Connie. This was due to having those newly built airports from World War II. And so the Connie is our silver plane on the right-hand side with red Trans World Airlines or TWA painted on it. Now, this was actually one of the first long-range civilian airliners to go into service after the war. 44 and 81 passengers and 6 crew members. This aircraft here is the 10th Connie ever built, and the oldest one still left in the world. Flew briefly with the U.S. Army Air Forces in 1946, and then returned to Lockheed and resold to Trans World Airline, where it flew from 1947 to 1961. But just past the Connie on our right still, we're going to see a current commercial airliner that's in production today. It's the aircraft with ANA on the tail. That is our Boeing 787 Dreamliner. This is actually the first jet airliner not constructed of aluminum. There's that material again. I really like aluminum. but instead this one's nearly 80% carbon fiber composites, and that, along with new advances in engines and wing shape, make it one of the most fuel-efficient and cost-effective jet airliners ever built. And now the one we're looking at is the second one to have ever been produced, and it participated in aircraft testing and certification along with the other prototypes. It carries the markings of All Nippon Airlines because that was the first airline to buy the new aircraft, which can hold 242 passengers and a crew of 8. So a lot bigger than that first Viscount we started out with. But now that we've seen some commercial airliners, we're going to give some attention to our cargo aircraft, which are mainly used by the military. And these aircraft tend to focus on the size of the aircraft just because the military had a lot of need to transport large amounts of equipment, supplies, and troops. And so our first example here on our left-hand side is our Douglas C-54 Skymaster. And these are cargo planes based off the DC-4 airliner that actually began as commercial airliners. But then the Army Air Forces got a hold of them in early 1942, and then we soon had cargo versions. Now, C-54s are best known for participating in the Berlin airlift that took place between June 1948 and September of 1949. Now, in the largest humanitarian effort ever, 2.3 million tons of food, medicine, fuel, and other supplies were delivered to West Berlin, mostly in these C-54s. And our museum C-54 participated in that very airlift from September 1948 through January of 1949.
Look at that thing.
Now the two nearly identical aircraft here on our left-hand side are our C-130 Hercules, one of the most popular cargo aircraft out there. Now these cargo planes have been in military and civilian use since the 1950s. Advanced versions of them are still in production today, and the green one on our left is an excellent example of one of the first versions of the plane. This is kind of our baseline. You'll still see a lot of these in the sky today, just a little bit more upgraded. And now the gray one we're pulling up next to here has one key difference. The gray one was specially modified to deliver supplies to the research and South Pole. And they did that by adding massive skis to the landing gear. So take a look at those skis. That helps you to be able to take off and land in the snow. You certainly do not see skis like that in Tucson every day. And now, I mentioned that cargo aircraft are mainly used by the military, but they are not the only organization that needs to move large objects around. Another one of those is NASA. We're going to have our next stop. It's a large white aircraft with the inflated fuselage that you will surely never get mixed up for anything in a lineup. That is our Super Guppy. Now, isn't that just fun to say? And now, this was built by combining parts from a 377 airliner and Air Force C-97 for NASA in the 1960s. This is the first Guppy out of 5 that were built, and they were used to carry sections of rockets, the Apollo space capsules, the moon landers, and even whole other airplanes. The last cargo this one ever carried before it was retired was actually the Hubble Space Telescope. So talk about a way to ring in retirement. And now this one was used by NASA until 1991 when it was retired in favor of some of those newer Super Guppies.
We'll get a picture when we go around.
Now, based on the Douglas C-74, the C-124 Globemaster II is on our left-hand side, and that was supposed to give the U.S. Air Force a long-range heavy lift capability. It's got a distinctive double-deck fuselage and clamshell doors, which allowed for easy loading and unloading of cargo. Now, this was primarily designed to transport large and heavy cargo, including vehicles, equipment, and supplies. It's one of the U.S.'s largest and last propeller-driven transport aircraft of the 1950s and 60s.
Cool. Just the design.
Could you imagine the history flying them around?
Oh, I know.
You know, they've been everywhere.
And now also to our left here, we are going to see the white plane with the red cross on the tail and the wings. And this is actually the kind of plane that our Super Guppy was built from. This is the C-97 Stratofreighter by Boeing. And it was developed after a request by the U.S. Army Air Forces for a transport aircraft based on the B-29. It first flew in 1945 and proved to be so successful and versatile that Boeing modified the design slightly to create their first post-war airliner, the Boeing 377. And if you were paying close attention, that is the other aircraft the Super Guppy was built from. Wonder how they thought of that. In 1969, though, this aircraft was loaned out to the International Red Cross to fly relief supplies into Nigeria during the Civil War. That's why we're able to see all those red crosses on the plane. But now, as we've seen, while airplanes are used in all different capacities in the military, one of the greatest restrictions on any airplane is how far it can fly before it needs to land and refuel. So efforts to develop a way to refuel airplanes in the air began as early as the 1920s. But it wasn't until the 50s that a practical system for aerial refueling was actually developed. So on our left-hand side, we're going to see some examples of our aerial refueling aircraft, like the KB-50 Super Fortress, which is our polished silver aircraft there in the corner. It's all tucked away back there. One I lovingly call our stealth refueler. It's where all the cones are. You can't see it, right? It's very good. Now, I'm just teasing you. That one's having a nice, lovely spa day up in restorations, getting a brand new paint job, the works. We'll get it back out here soon, though.
There's that guppy over there.
Yeah.
Now, while being able to refuel in the air is important, the military also needed a way to detect incoming ain'ts. Since World War II, our primary method of doing just that has been radar. Now, because radar only works in line of sight, the higher you get your antenna, the further you can see. So on the right side of the tram, we have a great aircraft developed for Great Britain to carry radar antennas. That is the Avro Shackleton. And now if you look, you're going to see a large radome underneath the nose of the aircraft where the radar is housed. Now this is an also unique aircraft because of the fact that it has contra-rotating propellers. So two propellers in line with each other that turn in opposite directions. Now this makes the propellers a lot more efficient and more powerful than one single propeller. But now on the left-hand side, we're going to see some of our long-range bombers. Now, long-range strategic bombing was developed during World War I as a way to attack industrial and military targets far away from the front lines of battle. But those small and ineffective raids in World War I gave way to the massive air battles fought throughout the skies of Europe and Asia in World War II, as well as the fact that the development of the atomic bomb at the end of World War II also brought about new importance to even larger and longer-ranged bombers. So on our left, we have our first of the post-war bombers to enter service in the U.S. Air Force. That is going to be our B-36 Peacemaker. Now, this was the largest bomber to ever serve in the U.S. Air Force, and it used 6 of the most powerful piston engines ever
That's
developed.
this one, right?
Yeah.
And it was actually the last propeller-driven strategic bomber used by the United States. It went into service in 1949.
It's
but by
massive.
then, it was already becoming obsolete. And its replacement flew only 3 years later in 1952.
So big it doesn't fit on the
This
camera.
was a period of a lot of rapid advancement in our aircraft here, especially with engines and
All that
shape.
engineering for 2 years.
I know.
And they're obsolete.
Now the next of our bombers is going to be our B-52 Stratofortress Valkyrie, coming up on the left here in green and gray. Now this is a later version of the aircraft that was introduced in 1959, and it served until 1994. It served with the 1991 Gulf War with Iraq and participated in what was at the time the longest combat mission flown in history. So on the first night of the Gulf War in January 1991, This aircraft here, as well as several others, flew out of Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana non-stop to Iraq and back, launching cruise missiles at targets near Baghdad. And in all, the planes were refueled 4 times in the air and flew for a total of 35 hours before finally landing. Now we can see why it held that record for a little while.
Unbelievable. That long in the air? It's just amazing.
Now we do have one more B-52 we're going to see today. It's going to be our B-52D Lone Star Lady coming up next on the left with the black bottom. Now this version began flying in 1956 and was the main version of the aircraft used in the Vietnam War. Now they were painted this way with black on bottom and the green camouflage on top because most missions flown over North Vietnam were flown at night. And now from 1962 to 1974, the United States dropped over 7 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Last B-52 left the assembly line in 1962, and today 58 of them remain in active service, and they're expected to be used until 2050. That'll be almost 90 years of service for these airframes. Now they're getting updates and modifications and upgrades, but those airframes, very reliable.
That's massive.
Now on the right side of the tram, we're going to take a look at some of our foreign aircraft collections. So aircraft built outside of the United States. And represented here we have some from Germany, Great Britain, Poland, Denmark, Switzerland, and Soviet Union. These consist of trainers, fighters, and fighter bombers. And the first one I want to highlight is our Alpha Jet on the right. That was the European answer to the expanded cost of developing military aircraft in the 70s. This was because this was a joint collaboration by manufacturers in both France and West Germany. Ours carries the markings of the West German Luftwaffe, or their Air Force, where they were used as close air support fighter bombers. They were also used as trainers in the French Air Force. So, spread out the cost of development between countries and you ensure a higher number of aircraft sales.
Think about how many people this airplane.
And now directly next to the Alpha Jet, we have our English Electric Lightning, which is the only Mach 2 European-developed swept-wing fighter jet operated by the Royal Air Force. Now the Lightning entered service with the Royal Air Force in the 1960s as a bomber interceptor. Its mission was to defend the United Kingdom from Soviet bombers, and versions of the Lightning remained in service until the late 1980s. The Lightning represented great advancements in performance and technology because its power-to-weight ratio enabled the aircraft to stand on its tail and exceed the speed of sound in a vertical climb. However, the Lightning did have a limited range of only 800 miles, or 1,287 kilometers, because it used just too much fuel.
Oof.
Speed of sound going vertical.
Vertical, yeah. Isn't that something?
That's a rocket.
And now a subset of our foreign aircraft collection on our right is going to be our Soviet-designed jet fighters. So the earliest and first on the row is going to be our 2-seat MiG-15 trainer, dating to the 1950s. It's one with the 038 painted in red on it. Now as we roll down this row here, they're going to get progressively more recent. The last one on the row is the latest, and that is a MiG-29 Interceptor that was introduced in the late 1980s. And now while all these aircraft were designed in the Soviet Union, I want to point out that most of them were not built there. Many of the examples we're seeing right here were actually built in China and Poland.
I wouldn't fly one.
Well, you wouldn't be.
This one's going to have a nice blue 53 painted on it. So as I said, that is the latest one. It's our MiG-29 Interceptor.
Okay, then you tell me that's not a copy of ours.
Well, sure it is.
Completely.
Sure it is.
But now to the left, we are going to see most of the museum's collection of helicopters, which were initially developed in the 1930s
Skorsky.
to take off and land vertically, eliminating the need for large open area. Found extensive use with the military as well as in the civilian world. Whole bunch of different jobs, very versatile aircraft. So it makes sense that the first one we talk about more specifically, though, is going to be our Bell UH-1 Huey on the left in green with the red cross painted on the front. Now this is one of the most widely used and popular helicopters out there. and the Huey was introduced by the U.S. Army during the Vietnam War, and it became one of the symbols of American involvement.
I know.
In the war.
I played hockey with a guy that flew one of those.
Evacuation aircraft that was responsible for
in that war.
Wounded soldiers from the battlefield to the hospitals. And now the use of these helicopters saved the lives of a lot of soldiers who otherwise would not have made it to treatment in time if these were not available. And now the one helicopter on our right-hand side that we're going to see here is actually developed for the United States Army. It's one of the largest heavy lift helicopters developed. And this is known as the Sky Crane. And in the 60s, the Army needed a heavy lift helicopter capable of carrying large objects like artillery vehicles and large amounts of other cargo. This helicopter, great answer, because it can carry 27,000 pounds. And so since their retirement from the military in the early 90s, Sky Crane has seen extensive use in fighting forest fires and in the logging and construction industries.
That's massive.
That just looks a complete workhorse.
Now, on our left-hand side, though, we're going to have our MiL-24D attack helicopter, known to NATO as Hind. Now, this is a unique Soviet-designed helicopter that does not have a Western counterpart. It was an attempt to combine the firepower of an armored helicopter gunship with the troop-carrying capability of a light assault helicopter, like the Bell UH-1 Huey. Now, that troop-carrying capability proved to be of little use in combat, but the Hind has become one of the most successful attack helicopters ever built, and it actually survived the fall of the Soviet Union as well as the ending of the Warsaw Pact, as it still remains in service with the Russian military and 30 other countries.
Attack one.
But directly next to the Hind, we're going to have our Sikorsky CH-37 Mojave helicopter, which was a heavy lift helicopter for the Marines. Now, it proved to be especially useful in transporting cargo and vehicles through those clamshell doors. And now some of these Mojaves were also deployed to Vietnam, and while their large size did make them easy targets during air assault missions, they proved to be very good at retrieving downed helicopters from the combat zones. But despite their success in that regard, only 55 out of the 150 were actually produced. Now, all that being said, we're going to wave on goodbye to Tired Dude. Let him get back to his nap. And we're going to roll on off to our last stop today.
That's the one that can pick up all the weight.
On the left might look a little familiar. It's going to be that orange and white helicopter. And that is because this is our Bell HH-1N Iroquois, which is typically called the Twin Huey, because it was upgraded to have two engines and a larger and longer cabin than the original Huey we saw a minute or two ago. Now, this one was a VIP transport for the Marine Corps, and in May of 1987, it carried Ronald Reagan during the G7 summit in Venice, Italy. In 1990, though, it was converted to the search and rescue configuration that we can see here. Now, that VIP interior was removed, and it was assigned to the Marine Corps Air Station here in Yuma, Arizona, where it worked as a search and rescue helicopter for both the military and civilian sectors, until its retirement in just 2020. So this one's fairly new to retirement life, but it seems to be enjoying it.
Retirement is good.
And now with that, I do want to thank you all for riding the Pima Air and Space Museum tram. We do also operate the Titan Missile Museum down in Green Valley, and the Tucson Military Vehicle Museum. Now, the Titan Missile Museum in Green Valley gives visitors the opportunity to tour the only remaining Titan II missile silo. And now the Tucson Military Vehicle Museum is actually right next door. And we can experience a rich collection of military vehicles from World War I to present day. So, I hope you folks enjoy the rest of your visit to the Pima Air and Space Museum and have a great day.